Good afternoon and welcome to the law. This is your legal light. It is your health law. And here we give you platinum legal education. And I have in my hand here a report. It's called the Constitution Review Committee 2025 Report of the Constitution Review Committee 2025 Proposals for Amendment of the 1992 Constitution presented to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama. So this is the Professor HKC Prempeh Constitution Review Committee report. And it's over 600 pages. It's about 689 pages. 689 pages. Before this, as you may have known, there's a committee that was formed by Oseiche Mensah Bonsu under President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. It was chaired by Clara Berry Kasati. They also produced a report. I have it in soft. I don't have the hard one. And they also produced a report of almost 300 or so pages, asking for various radical amendments to the Constitution, including having 25 ministers, only 25 ministers, no deputy ministers, no regional ministers, everything. Right. But before that, in 2024, before that, in 2010, Professor John Evans Atamels set up a committee, and that committee presented its report on the 20th of December 2011. That's what I hold in my hand here. So that is Constitution Review Commission. It was chaired by Professor Albert Fiajo. Report of the Constitution Review Commission from a political to a developmental constitution, presented to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Ghana, Professor John Evans Fifi Atamels. And this one too is about 1,000 pages. The total pages, as I find here, is 960 pages. 960 pages. This is the Professor Albert Fiajo Committee report. So at least I've taken you through 3 different reports. The latest is this one. And this one also draws from the 2011 report and the 2024 report. So what next? Are they going to be on the shelf and gather dust? This is the law. It's your legal light. It is your health law. I've got the best brains joining us to look at what happens to this report. We'll be right back. I'll introduce my guest to you right away, but before that, let's listen to Chairman of the Constitution Review Committee. All right, I was going to play Professor HKC Prempeh briefly to you to tell you a bit about the background of the process that they went into to produce the report that we now have. Joining me right here via Zoom, Oliver Bakavomowo, Constitutional Rights and Strategy Advisor at Democracy Hub. And Oliver Bakavomowo had a lot to do with the 2011 report, the Albert Fiajo Committee report. He was one of the guys who are silent, quiet in the background, and just typing their lives away. Vera Abna Addo is Programs Officer, CDD Ghana, Elections, Rule of Law, and Anti-Corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for making time to join us on the law.
Thank you, Samson.
Great. Hi, Vera.
Yes, hello, Samson.
Great. I can hear you as well. Right. So, many have heard and spoken about the stories in the Constitution Review Committee's report. particularly the ones that have become very popular. The presidential tenure has been, as it were, increased from 4 to 5 years, and therefore, once you become a president, you have the opportunity to be president for about 10 years, for example. These are the popular parts of the recommendations that people have become familiar with. That there will be a campaign off-season. There will be a period where no campaigning is allowed, as happens in this country, right after the election. Even before a new president is sworn in, the opposition begins their campaign. We're going to adopt the situation where elsewhere the campaign is prohibited until a certain point, where it is open for a short period of about 3-4 months or so before the elections. That the age, qualification age to be president has also been reduced, not increased, reduced from 40. Now you can be 30 and be qualified, 35 and qualified to become, to contest to be president. Of course, when it comes to the ministerial numbers, they've also tried to cut it down to a total of, is it 57? Because they say cabinet should be 19 and the ministerial group should not be more than 3 times the number that makes cabinet. So 19 times 3. No deputy ministers, all of those things. They're popular. People have heard about them. They also have made proposals about if you're a minister, then you can be an MP. If you're an MP, you can be minister. If you resign as an MP to be minister, you will not get that opportunity, and so on and so forth. These are the popular parts. But there are the parts that are not popular, but important. I'll begin with Oliver to share with us a couple of those not popular but important recommendations for him. And then we will zoom into moving from a report to implementation. Yes, Oliver.
Thank you, Samson. The first part of the report that I would highlight, which doesn't get significant attention, is what the committee calls the problem of private bodies in the Constitution. Now, this has been discussed in some parts. Some people have talked about it, that the committee is removing the Ghana Bar Association from the Constitution, and the conversation has been narrowed in that regard. But the Constitution, the committee does a lot more than that. What it does is that it takes the 1992 Constitution and look at the number of instances where private organizations have been mentioned as represented on various bodies, and says that there are 2 problems that this creates. One, that these private organizations are private in the sense that individuals can decide that we don't want them anymore, and so they can just wrap up and go. And when that happens, it can create a blockage of our institutions' ability to function. And this is not hypothetical. There are 2 examples already under the Constitution, where we have the Retired Senior Police Officers Association, which at the time the Constitution was being adopted existed, but which no longer exists. And we don't know, and technically in law, it means that the council which should have been represented on is never properly constituted, and the person can legally challenge his constitution and the decisions it makes. The second one is under the Media Commission. There's a provision for representing the National Women's Committee, which was then existing at the time, which no longer exists anymore. Again, it has disappeared. So I say that there's an inherent risk in choosing these organizations that are not public bodies that exist on the Constitution. The second risk is that it took a template of all the private organizations that existed in the 90s and used them as representatives of the country. But the country is consistently evolving, and new groupings and new interest bodies that did not exist at the time begin to develop that was represented in our governance. So what it says is, what we need to do is to be able to take that as a problem on its own and think about how do we solve this. One, it says that we think that the interest of the framers in bringing private bodies on these various public committees or commissions is to ensure some representation from industry, from interest groups, from different. But instead of saying that, it chose a name-specific body to be put there. So it says that we should clean that up and say, if we want engineers to be represented on the body, we say engineers. If we want lawyers, we say groups representing lawyers. So we use the industry groupings to say that these are the kind of people we want there. Then the next step is that Parliament must then pass what they call the Constitutional Professional Bodies Representation Act, which would say that, one, if we want churches or religious bodies to be represented, these are the mechanisms by which we would choose those representatives. So one, it becomes flexible and it can be amended from time to time. Secondly, in addition to the flexible mechanism that it contemplates, it creates specific rules for bodies that are represented, meaning that they acquire the character of public bodies in terms of fiduciary obligations, in terms of how they choose their membership and who can be on them. It means that the way in which they operate must be democratic in themselves. And then fourthly, that there would be a mechanism if the body was supposed to disappear, how it will pass on to another group to be able to represent from time to time. So we have seen the kind of conflict already among the lawyers' associations that's already created.
Yeah.
Where now, at the time when the Constitution was adopted, there was only the Ghana Bar Association. Now we have I think it's the Law Society of Ghana that has been created, and it's contemplated that other groupings will come on as we mature as a republic. So then how do you ensure that persons who are legally minded or legal professionals will then
I suppose by the time you'd have had the Ghana National Association of Teachers. Now we have at least at the last count about three or four. Right.
Yes, that represent them. The same thing that concerns nurses and architects and things like that, and surveyors. So this is one of the ways in which, one of the things when you're writing a constitution, you have to be very mindful of is constitutional failure.
Right.
Now, when there's legislative failure, quickly you can go into parliament and pass a new law. But when there's constitutional failure, and most of these are happening in entrenched provisions, it means that you need a whole referendum. That when an organization no longer exists, that will have to wrap them up and then be able to go off. So that's one of the key technical additions that the committee does. A second one, which for me I think is also very critical, is how it proposes to deal with the Electoral Commission.
Okay.
So it says that the current Electoral Commission has 3 mandates under our laws. 1, it acts as the registrar of political parties. 2, it conducts our public elections. And 3, it's supposed to vet campaign financing. And it says that what we have noticed is that the commission has paid more attention, for instance, to the process of organizing public elections more than the other mandates. And to some extent, maybe even the registration of political parties. But when it comes to the bigger concern of the framers, which is about the monetization of our elections, the Electoral Commission has not been able to play that mandate because that in itself is huge and all-encompassing. And so to be able to deal with the questions of monetization of our elections, it is proposing the independent registrar of political parties and regulator. And what they're supposed to do is to, first of all, 1, deal with how we register political parties and how you're able to ensure compliance. So there have been instances where people have filed right to information requests where even the minimum constitutional requirement that the political parties must file their accounts, the political parties have not done so. Then, in complementing that, it says that when you look at the terrain of our politics, the vast majority of financing of our political campaigns do not go to political parties. Most people donate to the individuals or the candidates rather than the party. But this is a huge lacuna or absence or gap in our laws where we do not have any mechanism to ensure that we can be able to vet who is contributing money to various political campaigns, where the money is coming from, and also to be able to then note who are the centers that are likely to exert influence over our politicians when we elect them. So it took as a starting point the fact that in the 2020 election, presidential campaigns were reported by that time around less than 1 million in terms of running for presidential elections. And by 2024, or that by 1992, less than 1 million. And now we are talking about 150 million as in the last election, and even it is projected to have even been more. And it's saying that we do not know where that money is coming from. And our inability to be able to regulate and be able to look at that means that we are prevented to be able to understand how money moves, how our politicians are influenced, and the connection between that and corruption in the country. So if you take something like this and the measures and what the proposals that are being introduced, in many ways, we can tackle some of the biggest problems around, monetizing of the delegate system, who are the shadowy figures behind our campaign financing, who are the ones who are getting sole source procurement, and whether we can match them to campaign donors, more generally. So if you take something like that, which has been under-discussed and under-reported, the way in which it seeks to transform our campaign finance rules most definitely is one of the biggest advancements in this report, which in fact does not exist in either the Fiajo report or even the Claire Kasati reports.
Right. And I'd like to say this to you, Oliver. Yesterday, when we were having News File and you were bringing your perspectives on the economic matters and also on the mass dismissal matters, as in post-election appointments and so on, I was leaving church this morning, and there's a businessman who has Ghana at heart who came to me and said, please, we'd like you to have guys like Oliver a lot more times, because that's the intellectual, output they bring to the discussions. They love them. The reason I'm bringing this in is because he loved what you brought on, which I also did, which is that I've heard people say, for example, that the Constitution Review Committee said nothing about how Ghana's economy should be run. Somebody I heard who is finance-oriented said they should have said something about DDEP so it doesn't happen again. Once he didn't hear anything like that, he thinks the document is just too political and that's all. Then we were talking about mass dismissals after the government assumed office of people who had just been appointed or promoted or recruited after December 7, after the election. And you made the input by referring us to, a provision of the recommendations. If you don't mind, let's go back there briefly before I bring in Abena. You also actually pointed us to land reforms, how the political class, appear to capture our lands, part of what they call state capture. They take our precious lands and they pay pittance for it. It's always an issue every 4 years. And they appear to have solutions to all of these.
Yes. So I'll start perhaps from the question of the sale of public assets.
Right.
Because they deal with this in two parts of the report. First, regarding the restrictions, which are the post-transition restrictions. Mm-hmm. And then also in how they are overhauling land administration systems in Ghana. So let's talk about the first part about the transition restrictions. So one of the big things that our politics has constantly talked about is whenever there's a change of government, what we are seeing is that there's a flurry of activity, which is the mass recruitment of people into the public service. Then also the signing of all range of contracts that we have seen in some instances, new governments cancel, and has resulted in huge judgment debts against the Republic. Then you have the instances of where public servants or public officers sell land assets to themselves. Now, if you will recall, this is something which has been challenged in the Supreme Court before,
Ablakwa or Mane against Jacob Echebi Lamte.
About the sale of public land against Jacob Echebi Lamte. And the Supreme Court said its hands were tied. The Constitution did not create any such restrictions. And so this attempt here says that once we go into the public polls at the end of the 4-year term, immediately a number of restrictions would bind either the outgoing president or the president in transition. It can even be that you're going to win the next term. It doesn't matter. Immediately within that period, transition period, one, you cannot recruit people into the public services whose term would extend beyond the 7th January, beyond the end of your term. So you can't do that recruitment. Two, any recruitment that will be done, we must show that there has been financial appropriations that are already made by the finance minister or by parliamentary appropriations bill already. So it's already part of a program of expenditure that already existed before we got into the elections. Three, there will be freezes on the entering into new contracts, including the sale of public assets, whether to yourselves or to any other, or to cronies or any other persons. We would freeze them to be able to give the new government a breathing space around this. And I showed that, in fact, this is not new and peculiar. The committee looked at other African countries where this is also becoming a problem and saying that even in terms of the appointment of judges and ministers, even in terms of the exercise of presidential pardons,
yes,
in Kenya, and we have had this problem in Ghana where at the eve of the president leaving, persons who have, raided the public purse, particularly those who have been charged with corruption, are the ones we pardon at the eve of election, at the transition. Like in Kenya, they have restricted those. So the committee was very concerned about the transfers of public assets during this period and placed restrictions on them. Then it goes further, as I was talking about, in terms of the land administration aspects, where it says the first one is that we are no longer going to vest our lands and natural resources in the president anymore.
That's right.
We're going to vest it in the people of Ghana for generations to come. Then it moves further and says the Lands Commission is going to be, and the various Mineral Resources Commission are going to be independent in the way in which they operate, in terms of how they administer this. But unlike the president, where we created a presidential trust, where we as citizens who are beneficiaries cannot enforce it, you can't go to court to set aside something you said is not in the interest of the beneficiaries. Now we are introducing a host of principles that will govern the lands and our natural resources. And a person can actually go to court to enforce the trust. Because if we are beneficiaries of the trust, we should be able to do that. Then it creates principles that binds them in how they administer the trust on our behalf.
Right.
So connected with this, then, it will not be consistent with the interest of the trust for anybody to sign off public trust assets to public office holders, because it will be breaching the interest which is supposed to be for the interest of Ghanaians and future generations. How in which the committee has contemplated controls. Then in addition to that, there's a third part of it, which is it brings in the Auditor General, who must audit public assets. And at the end of every year, it provides us the list of public assets that existed and how the government has dealt with it within the year. So we are moving this then into where there's speculation, whether or not it exists, we don't know, into a report that must be presented yearly to the public and to Parliament that shows us the state of public assets which have been acquired and those that have been either realized within the year. And so you can see, unless you're able to read and have a holistic view of the report, you don't see all these nuggets that are scattered across that, in fact, form a holistic framework.
That's right. Thank you very much, Oliver. And of course, as we are speaking, we are still sharing, snippets of some of those that are popular and even not popular with you. And as you see, as they speak, you see those ones also roll on the introduction of, a centralized, anti-corruption and ethics commission, which will merge the OSP as well. And the Attorney General, who is a political, actor, will no longer be prosecuting corruption matters, but this is the entity that will do so. And it's important because this country, every year, we are unable to account for as much as $5 billion US, which is lost to corruption. So one of the ways to liberate this country from, the shackles of corruption, our bane, is to make sure that we have a body that can fight that and fight that well. I'm going to Abena now, but before I do, I want to read at page 79, that's recommendation at the paragraph 1.94. It says the committee recommends an amendment to Chapter 8 of the Constitution by the introduction of a new provision to forbid or prevent the taking of certain specified actions by the president or a member of his or her government or administration within the transition period commencing from the date of the presidential election to the date of the assumption of office of the next president as follows. A, no appointment, nomination, or offer of employment to a public officer may be made or extended to any person, the term of which would extend into the next administration. B, no new contract or commitment, including a salary or wage increase, may be granted or offered that is not already approved in the current year's appropriations. C, no transaction for the sale or purchase or grant of a leasehold interest. So Oliver spoke about these, but I just read them to you so you know that he's actually speaking almost like verbatim what is in the recommendation. Grant of a leasehold interest in a public land or sale of any public asset to any person may be commenced or concluded. And D, no bill may be introduced by a certificate of urgency. Within the transition period, there shouldn't be anything like that. And they conclude by saying any action taken or purported to be taken, or transaction entered into or purported to be entered into, in violation of any of the above provisions, shall be deemed to be void and would impose no obligation on the state in favor of any third party. So this is like to tell you that you have been warned. If there's election and the elections have happened, a government has lost power, like Nanado's regime, MPP lost power, and then John Mahama has won, and they are in the process for John Mahama to take over, and you are in a hurry going to take contracts, they are going to pass new things and all of that. You are disturbing yourself. Anything you do does not bind the government, doesn't bind the state. It will be void. Now let's go to Abena. What are these not popular yet or not popularized yet, but important recommendations by the committee that you are interested in sharing?
Okay, thank you, Samson. I think I have listed about five issues here. The first one is that the Constitution Review Committee recognize the rights of young people, the youth. They recognize that globally we have a youth badge, and more, if you look at the numbers in West Africa, in Ghana, if you look at the Ghana Statistical Service about the youth population, and so the committee recommend a whole chapter. They recommend a whole chapter or a provision that will recognize the rights of the youth, and this is more like to complement the existing general rights without undermining them. And this is, for me, this is in recognition of conversations around youth development, youth empowerment, the sustainable development goals. If a nation is not able to really empower the young people in the nation, it means that we are not getting anywhere. And so for me, I think that the report is progressive and also really considers that the youth are the future, because if you look at the first instance is where the committee recommends that we have to reduce the age for the presidency to 30. We have Nigeria started a whole campaign about not too young to run. We have seen young people doing incredible things, and this is, for me, this is to ensure that there's that intergenerational conversation to ensure that we are preparing our youth to take over. Many have raised concerns, but if you look at almost all the great innovations in agriculture, in fintech, in almost all the aspects are being led by young people. And if you look at just this month, you look at how much young people have promoted Ghana and put Ghana at the top. It tells you that young people, young Ghanaians, when given the opportunity, will do incredible things. So for me, a whole chapter dedicated to the rights of young people is commendable, and that's something we must look into. And moving beyond just tackling youth issues just by policy, legislation, the national youth policy, other countries' best practices consider the youth. I think the definition of the youth have been quite, everyone has their own definition, but at least our national youth policy. The National Youth Authority defines it from 15 to 35, which is this in line with what African Union does. The UN has its own definition. But what is important is that as a country, we have our own definition. We are prioritizing young people. We do not leave the youth to their own, at their own mercy. If we also have young people at different vulnerabilities, because if you are looking at the youth, we have youth in education, youth in art of education with skills. So this is, for me, if we're able to recognize that there's a whole population of the Ghanaian population that needs some special attention, I think that this is something that we haven't really looked into, but it's quite commendable for us to recognize that the largest population is under 25 currently in Ghana. It means that there must be special attention. We must be very deliberate about ensuring that the rights and development of youth is more deliberately enhanced, not just leaving it to what a different government or politicians would like to do. Either it's a new ministry or it is a policy action or revising policy, but it's a constitution. There are constitutional provision that is backing the rights of young people. And connecting to that is also how the committee recognized housing as a right. Ghana's CRC Service mentioned that there's a deficit, housing crisis. About 30% of Ghanaians reside in either in slum or in some informal settlement. I think that decent accommodation should be a right of Ghanaians. And you should just go around the country, and you see how people live, and there's no dignity in that. And I think that we have to think through properly and see how that economy, the housing economy, would enhance the dignity of every Ghanaian. That sometimes we ignore it, thinking that we are okay with where we are, but the state should take it as a responsibility to ensure that every Ghanaian has a decent accommodation and should be living in a house that for me is befitting a human being. Sometimes if you see how some people live, I don't think it's good as a country where we have so much natural resources, we have everything that we need to, but we still have majority of our population living like, I don't know, it's not something we want to really talk about. My other point is also about reform. The committee also proposed that we change the name of Ghana Prison Service to Ghana Correctional Service. I'm like, okay, what's the point? If we are looking at reforms, prison service, what's the mandate of Ghana Prison Service? It's supposed to correct people, but we have seen the nature of our prisons in this country. We have seen pictures of it. We have seen how people go and come back even worse than they went in. And so if we are looking at, I think the whole perception and maybe also a bit of the emotional, the mental, knowing that we are correcting people instead of punishing them and making them worse off. So it may look insignificant, but I think it's something that we must look into, that we are reforming our prisons. Yeah, and more and more young people are there. We can't just have it.
There's something in a name, isn't it? So that if their name is correctional service, all the time, that's the brand, that's the thinking. You are supposed to correct the people. The things you are doing to them, the kind of food you are feeding them, the restrictions you make them go through, are all of these leading to correcting them. So a name change is important.
Yeah.
Right.
Initially, I wasn't sure of it, but I thought that, yes, I agree with you. Name change can really have a big impact on how we really look at the reform agenda with our prison service.
Right.
Maybe my last but one, I'll say that I'll talk about. They have a theme that all development is local. And I think that why is the government not local? Everything is centralized in our nation. We need to decentralize. We need to ensure that our decentralization is working. We've had the best decentralization framework. Many countries came in to learn from us. Unfortunately, we are not able to dissolve the power. So why can't I vote for my MMDC? Why can't I vote for my DCE? And then it has to be somebody at the top that has to nominate somebody at that local level. Why can't the local people decide that this is the person we want to, so that if someone is appointed, if a DCE is appointed, he or she first has to account to the people before the person will account to whoever is at the top. So for me, I think that theme alone tells us a lot, that if you are really going to make sure that our development is at the local level, then the citizens, local communities are the ones taking the decisions and their benefits. And on natural resources, also under development, or making sure that all development is local, mentioned that a percentage of our natural resources should be given to the local community for local development. Samson, I am from a mining community, and if you look at how mining communities still live in poverty, basic infrastructure, until recently, good healthcare, we were struggling to, in fact, more times people in my community have to travel miles, distance, hours to get good facility, healthcare, education, roads. In fact, we still don't even have a third road. We have to travel to a point where we can get a third road. So if you look at how much resources is taken from the communities, and how much farmlands have been taken for national good, and very limited resources or many attention is given to the local communities. For me, I think that this is quite commendable, that everywhere the natural resources, a percentage of the revenue is given and dedicated to the community for development, so that communities themselves can know that, okay, this is a sacrifice for the national community. We are also benefiting in terms of infrastructure, in terms of education, in terms of even employment and the local context that we are looking out for. The reports also recommend that common fund be increased to 10%. I think that is also good, because every development should be local. And important, they also recommend that members of parliament during recess should be mandated to hold at least one in-person town hall, like in their various constituency. And it actually has I think recommend that the NCC, they do this with parliament and NCC, so that the NCC will assist with the coordination and mobilization. And I think that he also looked at the role of what the NCC will be doing, not just education, but engagement, which is commendable, that most of the time MPs go back to their constituents and they're either meeting their party people or they are doing other things. But if they are mandated to meet the constituents, they are supposed to report back to Parliament on their engagement. And I'm sure if the media is also at the local level, could also broadcast it for us to see what is happening, that we don't just allow the MPs to take decision at the party level, at the various caucus level. And so for me, the report shifts from just the usual legal policy. That's something that you could read and think that the committee was thinking about the local persons, thinking at everybody. How do we ensure that development is at the grassroots level? For me, this is commendable. We haven't spoken much about it, but something that we need to really look into it. And my last one will be a session that the committee talked about restoring trust in institutions. We have had various institutions, accountability institutions have suffered a lot of mistrust, and you know what mistrust will do to our institutions. When the public doesn't trust the institutions, what happens? And so a bit more on judicial reforms. I know the judicial itself started some reform, but if we're able to have some legal backing in the constitution about how this is done, then it's not just limiting it to what individuals will do, but as a country, we are restructuring our whole development. So I think these are issues for me, I think, that we haven't spoken much about, but if we can really look into it, that if we do not get anything at all, some of these issues that we really need to look into.
All right. Yeah. Right. So I guess I've just told you some of the recommendations that have not yet been popularized, but that are very important, that we need to pay attention to. So I'll continue to invite you. It's almost 700 pages. Look for it of course, the full report, I'm not sure it's available online yet, but there was the recommendations that actually that's not the full recommendations report that was put out in the public. Even that one, if you found time to read that one, you should find sufficient satisfaction in how this nation's governance architecture, our economy, and local governments, almost everything will see such a radical change. Let's all be part of the process, especially as we move on to the implementation phase. So now let me get to my guest again, and we're going to look at how do we move on from here. When the Professor Fiajo report was produced, the almost 1,000-page report, the biggest social political data ever produced in our country, from what I know so far. They titled their work From a Political to a Developmental Constitution. That's the change they wanted to give Ghana. And Professor Prempeh's committee speak about transforming Ghana from an electoral democracy to a developmental democracy, almost the same. From an electoral democracy to a developmental democracy. There was a white paper that was issued on this. We are told that it approved almost 90% of what is here, but those that it disagreed with, some of us disagreed with those disagreements. It didn't see the light of day, but they have worked on some of that which is here. It has helped the committee now. So this time we are told that there will not be a white paper, but there will be a position paper. What's the difference really? I put that question to Oliver Barker-Vormawor first. But before that, let me read page 21. The committee said, methodology and public participation. The Constitution Review Committee undertook extensive public engagement and consultations. This included targeted stakeholder engagements across 11 thematic areas, consultations with eminent constitutional office holders and former leaders, 10 zonal public engagements across the country, youth-focused digital engagement, and structured diaspora consultations. The committee received over 820 written submissions and reached more than 114,000 citizens through digital platforms, in addition to over 2,400 in-person participants. Across these engagements, citizens expressed strong support for democratic governance, but growing dissatisfaction with governance outcomes. Recurring concerns included corruption, excessive executive power, the high cost of politics, weak accountability, environmental degradation, ineffective decentralization, and the exclusion of women, youth, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups from meaningful participation in the public life. These perspectives significantly shaped the committee's diagnosis and recommendations. So for those who are suggesting that the committee has not done some broad consultation and we need to do some further broad, I don't know what else we want to do, because it means we'll be consulting and ending forever and nothing will be done. Meanwhile, they did extensive work. And for those of us who think it was a group of lawyers getting together, check the committee again. It was not a group of lawyers. And look at the work again. It's not lawyers suggesting what has to be done. Oliver, how do we progress from here? White paper and position paper.
So, as we know, the white paper is something that the Constitution provides for. So we know by practice and also by what the Constitution intends for it, is that it's supposed to indicate to us whether or not it accepts the recommendations that the Commission of Inquiry has come up with, or what is the government's take on it. The position paper is not something which we are familiar with as an administrative tool. But we can only take any guidance from the name that this is supposed to communicate what is government's own position with respect to the recommendations that have been made more broadly. My understanding is that the government is going to take a non-prescriptive approach, which means that departing from what it did with the white paper, is not going to say we accept this, we reject this, we do that, but rather we are expressing our view on this particular recommendation or that particular recommendation. Now, I'll be frank that there's not sufficient alignment in terms of government communications of the different individuals that are speaking about this. But my understanding so far is that the government wants to be clear that in order not to kill momentum for the process, as happened when the white paper was published, many people felt that the most critical aspects of the report were how do you call it, watered down by the white paper, that this approach will look at, the government is opening up the conversation and said that we have seen the work you have done, maybe our thoughts on this is different, but that is how we think it should go. Now, my understanding so far from what the Attorney General, for instance, has communicated is that there's going to be a Constitution Review Implementation Committee. Maybe the government white paper, the position paper, is going to be what the government thinks that will be submitted to the Implementation Committee. It's what I understand it to be, but hopefully it doesn't take the form of prescriptive or directive and says that this is yes, this is no, or this is bad, or what the situation may be.
So when we get the position paper, what it means therefore, unlike a white paper, which is binding, a position paper that should not be binding. So are we able to proceed with the implementation without complying? Can we proceed with it, discounting what government may disagree with?
I think we ought to take it into account. But what I'm asking all the stakeholders, in my opinion, is that I think for instance, the NDC outside of government itself must also issue its own position paper. That the MPP must issue its position paper, civil society must issue its position paper on the different aspects of the report. Because within that, we begin to narrow the consensus building work that has to go into securing the reforms that we need. So rather than discard it, it narrows maybe the points of agreement and disagreement to make it clearer for how the implementation process will go along. And it's important, it is also possible that, the government may face pushback from the other actors and decide that, okay, we are revising our position because maybe we are isolated in this particular view that we have taken on the report. We have seen this happen, for instance, right? Like if you take on an abstract level, the position that the government had taken in connection with the election of MMDCs on partisan lines, when other positions came up, the government realized that, okay, it was isolated on the thing. So maybe this is also an opportunity for other actors to also go into the process of developing their position paper. And where they agree with, maybe they should, civil society, for instance, I would recommend you come up with your top 20 and say that these are red lines that we believe reflect years of issues that we have been campaigning and advocating for around these issues.
Right.
And for people to dialogue around them.
All right. So, Abna, how do we progress from here so that we don't find ourselves where we found ourselves in 2011 when the CRC report was put forward and an implementation committee was actually set up, but here we are. It never was implemented up to now. Of course, there was a constitutional challenge in the Supreme Court, which was resolved on the 14th of October 2015, just before another election. It was submitted in December of 2011, correct? Yes, December of 2011, just when we're about to go for another election. And then the Professor Kwekwa's suit also traveled until October 14, 2015, just before we go into another election. What I understand is that if you want to implement these things in an election year, it's almost impossible.
Yes, so Samson, initially I thought that Professor Prempeh and the committee's work, they had a difficult task, considering that this is a third time we are doing this as a country. But at this point, I think that producing the reports is the easy part now, and the real work is the implementation. because there's a possibility of political resistance, because if you look at the reforms, it will affect power distribution. If you are capping ministers, if you do not want MPs to be ministers, you do not want them to serve on the board, you are taking appointment powers from the presidency. It means that you need, it has to be accompanied by some broad consensus building, political buy-in. Otherwise, the implementation will not.
But as you just said, the political opposition will be there. The members of parliament will not be happy that they are not going to get the opportunity to become ministers. They are not going to get the opportunity to continue to sit on boards and so on and so forth. Even the ministerial portfolio is going to be cut to only 57 and so on and so forth. We, the citizens, we must have a say, and they must respect our view, not theirs, correct?
Correct. You are correct. And this is where I think that we cannot do this without building consensus. And like Oliver said, it is the how, the approach. This is the recommendation. How do we do it? Is it that Parliament says that, oh, you cannot decide that we do not have any position at all as ministers? But can we say that certain ministers of state must not come from Parliament? So for me, I think that if we do not think through this to build consensus, it will be very difficult for us to move from here. And that is why the
How do we build the consensus again? I want to understand, building consensus at what level? Because the committee has engaged all the parties that must be engaged, the MPs, former presidents, former justices, former whoever they are, and even current sitting ones. When are we going to end if we want to continue to...
Like I said, you are taking power from people, you are redistributing power, and not everybody will be happy about it, and political class is going to resist. And this is where we citizens must agree that this is what we want. And if you look at the manifestos from the political parties, most of the recommendations are no different from what most of the parties are actually looking at for. So for me, the consensus building is to ensure that this is what the committee says. How do we move from here? And it may not also be just a 2-day, 3-day, a year. It could be a roadmap. That the implementation committee could give us and say that within the next 5 years, I think Kenya did that. They had a roadmap for the next 5 years. How do we implement this? And they had a number of about 50 committees. So the committee could give us a roadmap that going forward, we cannot get everything at a go. Some of them, it will require referendum. I think that based on what I had heard previously from Oliver's discussion, that some of them will have to, it means that we have to go to the polls. How do we do it?
All right, my time is up. In 30 seconds, Oliver, how do we maneuver this small thing about further consensus building?
I think that you are correct when you say that this is the people's document. And so, for instance, the citizens' platform for constitutional reform that has been put in place needs to do a lot of work in bringing the people onto the board. Because as you're correct, there's some people who, despite this being strenuous work, are still going to rise up against it. It means that more people must get involved in the conversation and demand that this would happen. So that's my take as to the way forward.
Thank you very much. Oliver Baka-Vollmer is with the Democracy Hub. He's Constitutional Rights and Strategy Advisor, Democracy Hub. Vera Abna-Addo is Programs Officer, CDD Ghana, Election Rule of Law and Anti-Corruption. We'll definitely have to continue these discussions and to get to a point where the will of the people must hold sway, rather than those who want to cherry pick and foist something else on us. I'm Samson Ladianyanini. This has been The Law. It's your legal light. It is your help law.